Hi everyone, and welcome to my fourth and final webcast about Middlemarch. It's been so wonderful having you sort of with me watching and listening to these, and I've really loved getting your feedback both about the videos and also about the great book itself. Many of you have said how you didn't want it to end. I also really spent so long reading the last 100 pages or so because I just savoured every one. I didn't want the book to run out. Someone said a very astute comment. I'm just looking down, so I've got it written all down in here. How interesting it was to show these women finding themselves within a world of male decision-making models and how they negotiated that, which I think is a really good point. A lot of people said how much they just loved all the characters, and the 800 odd pages just flew past because they really wanted to know what happened to each character, and how even the really minor characters were really well drawn. Also, thank you to those people who've pointed me towards great podcasts in particular and articles about Middlemarch itself. There's a really good In Our Time with Melvin Bragg, and also CBC Radio's Writers and Company. And I just discovered really late to the game here that if you just search in iTunes or wherever it is you get your podcasts for Middlemarch, then you get a list of all the different podcasts that feature it. So that's a really good way of finding out about Middlemarch, and also any other topics you want to learn more about. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the end of Middlemarch. I'm assuming most of you have read it, but still I'll try not to give away too much by way of spoilers. So basically, how can I put this? I think Lydgate and Dorothea, their sort of trajectories go sort of alongside each other. They don't overlap that much. And poor Lydgate, he's had this great dream of doing this amazing research into medicine, having, reaching these great heights. And his career as a provincial doctor just goes further and further downhill. Then I'm going to slightly skip over, without wanting to spoil things, the sort of terrible thing that happens to him, which causes everyone to think the worst of him. There's this kind of ambiguous situation. We, the reader, know that he's done no wrong, but everyone in Middlemarch, everyone suspects badly of him, and he feels there's nothing he can do to sort of clear his name, that because all the evidence is so circumstantial, it's all kind of word of mouth, but it's all bad, and he feels he can't kind of prove that he's right. It's also compounded by the fact that his marriage with Rosamond is disastrous. There's one particular phrase that Eliot has here, which I felt was really apt. She says, this is of Rosamond and Lydgate, they lived on from day to day with their thoughts still apart. And I just thought that is the perfect portrait of a sort of dysfunctional marriage, really, where you can't communicate with each other, where you're not really inhabiting the same mental worlds. Lydgate going about what work he had in a mood of despair, and Rosamond feeling with some justification that he was behaving cruelly. So poor Lydgate, you'd have hoped that when everyone outside thought badly of him, at least his wife think well of him, and they're too separate for that to happen. Until, and this is my favourite bit of the book, and I suspect it's many of your favourite bits, except that Dorothea is, the rumours reach her, and everyone's telling her about it, and she says she listened with deep interest and begged to hear twice over the facts and impressions concerning Lydgate. After a short silence, pausing at the churchyard gate and addressing Mr. Fairbrother, she said energetically, "You don't believe that Mr. Lydgate is guilty of anything base? I will not believe it. Let us find out the truth and clear him." That's how she ends book 7. And there's book 8 of, Dorothea going about her business clearing Lydgate. And I just think, good on you, Dorothea, wanting to see the best in someone, refusing to believe the worst. And so then in the next chapter, all the men, basically her advisors, I suppose, try and talk her out of it. And I'll just read a little bit. It's on page 734, if you have your book there. So Fairbrother is saying, okay, so he says, "I would not believe anything worse of him except under stringent proof, but there is the terrible nemesis following on some errors, that it is always possible for those who like it to interpret them into a crime. There is no proof in favour of the man outside his own consciousness and assertion." Pointing out the fact there's nothing to prove he's good. And Dorothea says, "Oh, how cruel," said Dorothea, clasping her hands. "And would you not like to be the one person who believed in that man's innocence, if the rest of the world belied him? Besides, there is a man's character beforehand to speak for him." "But my dear Mrs. Casaubon," said Mr. Fairbrother, smiling gently at her ardour, "character is not cut in marble. It is not something solid and unalterable. It is something living and changing, and may become diseased as our bodies do." "Then it may be rescued and healed," said Dorothea. "I should not be afraid of asking Mr. Lydgate to tell me the truth, that I might help him. Why should I be afraid?" And she goes on, and then she says, "People glorify all sorts of bravery, except the bravery they might show on behalf of their nearest neighbours." And I think it's this goodness for her neighbour that is so striking. She isn't romantically interested in Lydgate. He's not a close friend. He's not a relative. He's just a neighbour. And she is determined not only to see the goodness in him, but to clear his name for everyone. And she goes about and does this. And then that essentially is what leads to the most amazing, I think, probably the most amazing final line in literature. I was suddenly thinking of the last line of James Joyce's short story, The Dead, about the snow falling. But actually, this is such a good one. So it's right at the end, and Eliot goes back to the comparison with Saint Teresa, which she made right at the beginning, and her whole point is that Dorothea is not a great woman in the sort of great historic sense. There's no statue to her. Her story's not going to be told in history books. And she says, "But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." And I think that's exactly it. Dorothea's act is unhistoric. And that's what makes it so remarkable. She's just determined to do good, and so essentially saved Lydgate's life, and Rosamond's, I suppose, and made the world a better place. And perhaps it's the neighbourliness of this, again, that we can take in these times of a pandemic that is also really important. This is a time when we've all been in our homes a lot, where we've all been looking out for our neighbours, or have been asked to look out for our neighbours, things like getting deliveries for them, getting essentials. I feel like we have really got to know the people on our street when every evening we come to our doorsteps and do the clap. Every Thursday evening we do the clap. And I just think it's remarkable, Dorothea's instinct for goodness, for those who are who are close to her. And so little of what is written these days and so little of what we watch is about that almost kind of naive goodness. So much is about a sort of thirst for power or money or a scheme or a love story. And I mean, this is a love story as well. I've sort of steered clear of the love side of it a bit. But, you know, her relationship with Lydgate is not of love, of romantic love. It's just goodness to your neighbour, kindness to another human. And I just think it's a remarkable thing to take away. Sorry, this has sounded slightly gushy. So to wrap things up, this is a great book. You should all read it. Do not be put off by this enormous size because it's got millions of tiny chapters in, so you can go through it very steadily. And I'm just holding this up. You can see, I hope, can you see all the bottom there? Are little pages that I folded over. What I do when I'm reading a book and there's a bit that's really means something to me or seems really pertinent, because I often don't have a pen and paper to hand and I don't like writing everything down on my phone, I just fold over the bottom corner to mark it. And what maybe you can see is that basically, especially towards the end of this book, practically every other page is folded over. There's so much good stuff in it. So I really think you'd get a lot from this book. And the people who have been in touch with me and have now finished it have said, you know, what on earth am I going to read next? You know, what can come close? And I have to say, I have no idea. I think very few novels can follow Middlemarch. I love Daniel Deronda, another Eliot, if you want to go for that. Or perhaps you need to go for something totally modern. I would say the good news is that bookshops are opening up again as of Monday next week. Certainly Daunt's is, I think several others. So it is a really good time to go and browse and, you know, enjoy that pleasure of going into a bookshop again that we've all been missing for several months now, and find the successor to Middlemarch. And I wish you good luck. And thank you again for joining me on these webcasts. Okay, bye-bye.